Hello and welcome to this special edition of Politics here on France 24. We're 3 days away from round two of the presidential election, and just the day after a debate opposed the incumbent Conservative President Nicolas Sarkozy to his socialist challenger François Hollande. François Hollande has agreed to grant an interview to France 24 and our sister radio, Radio France Internationale. The interview was conducted by my colleagues Roselyne Febvre and Frédéric Rivière.
Hello everyone and welcome to our joint RFI and France 24 interview with Frédéric Rivière from RFI. Our guest today is François Hollande, the socialist candidate for France's presidency. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, François Hollande, for accepting this interview. Nicolas Sarkozy said this morning on a radio station that he kept going over and over the debate in his mind. Now, what sentence, if there's anything you regret, what might you regret having not said?
Nothing. There's no sentence that I've said that I regret, and there's nothing I didn't say that I regret having done, as if there was some kind of lack of a sense of repartee, and as if I think that the debate went not as I'd expected it to go, but as I wanted it to go.
Did you have stage fright beforehand?
This was an important moment, the presidential debate, and the expectations were high. There were many viewers.
Yes, about 18 million. Yesterday, just after the debate, Mr. Hollande, you said, now the electors know what I'm capable of. Does this mean that you have the impression that you showed yourself in an unfamiliar light?
This was the first time the French saw me in a major debate. Nicolas Sarkozy, in a way, had already been present in the debate held in 2007, and he's been on the screens for the past 5 years as the President of the Republic. So this was our first face-to-face encounter, a major encounter, and it was the first time that the French people saw me confronting the outgoing president. So it was a very important moment where the French were able to compare us.
Does this mean that you have the impression that you killed off the candidate of the soft left, as you were criticized for in the past?
No, I think that particular body has been jettisoned a long time ago. I don't know whether it's been thrown into the river or into some wasteland, but in the primaries, those who thought that I would not have the ability to win were proved wrong.
You laid out a very bleak assessment of Nicolas Sarkozy's 5-year term. Would you say then that if you win the elections, you will need to restore France's image throughout the world? And is that what you will be working towards if you're elected?
I think that there were unseemly incidents. There was a lot of division in the past term. It's not that Nicolas Sarkozy did everything badly, and it would be inappropriate for me to say this, including on international issues. I'm thinking of what's being done at present regarding Syria, but things were said, there were behavior, attitudes, choices which shocked our country and at times also shocked people abroad. I recall the speech in Dakar, the way Bashar al-Assad or Gaddafi were welcomed in France, even though it was the beginning of the term, and the expense on the Union for the Mediterranean with the presidents of Ben Ali and Mubarak, and all this expenditure which was not really well taken by our partners in Europe. So we're going to have to reunite, to bring people together, and this is what I sought to bring out in the debate.
We'll talk about international politics later. Yesterday, and for several weeks, we have been speaking about François Mitterrand. Nicolas Sarkozy mentioned François Mitterrand several times. We recall that François Mitterrand had to decide after 2 years of the common program of the left, after the failure of recovery, to switch to austerity. Are you sure, given the current economic situation, that you will not also be forced more quickly than planned to switch to austerity?
You're quite right to recall 1981. This was a period of great joy and for the left coming back to office after having been in the opposition for 23 years. So they came to power, and this is to the credit of François Mitterrand, and 2 years afterwards we had to make this U-turn. Now, I didn't want to take on this new responsibility, and I didn't want to take this risk, so there will not be any pause, because from the outset I have announced the promises will be kept, but I will not make any promises that I can't.
Will you be expecting a honeymoon period?
There'll be a honeymoon period which happens after every presidential election, as long as one gets it right regarding the measures to be taken. What Nicolas Sarkozy had was a flamboyant start to his term, and then at the end of his term he had austerity. So what I want to start immediately is to restore our public finances and to launch the recovery.
Well, exactly. On that point, France will have to drive down its deficit. But looking at the famous 60,000 civil servant jobs that you're going to create, what if IMF's growth forecasts are at 1% next year? What if they're right? And what then would you sacrifice? A balanced budget in 2017 or the 60,000 jobs that you anticipated?
First of all, I don't know whether those IMF forecasts are accurate. If they were to be accurate, it would be even more necessary to implement what I'm proposing to our European partners, which is to reflate, to launch the recovery, because we cannot accept that Europe is the only continent to be in a recession when we see recovery in the USA and the emerging countries with growth of over 7 or 8%. So we have to do everything to ensure growth. If growth were to be weaker than expected, then we would have to make choices. But I will not sacrifice the priorities that I presented to the French people, namely education.
And what about the 60,000 civil servants in the educational department? This implies contributions by other departments. What choices have you made? Which government departments will have to contribute to staff cuts?
All the other ministries, except the Education Ministry, the Justice Ministry, and the
Will the Defence Ministry be affected?
Internal Security. Under the law on defence spending, 54,000 jobs are to go. So adjustments will be made, but there will be redeployment in each ministries. These decisions will have to be either borne out or some aspects will be reviewed. So this non-replacement of 1 out of 2 civil servants is not part of my approach. I think we can go further. We can transfer some responsibilities to the local authorities, regional authorities, and other ministries will need to be bolstered. Looking, for example, at the Foreign Affairs Ministry, France's presence in terms of culture will have to strengthen the appeal of our language and culture and promote it more than we're doing today.
We'll talk about that in a moment, but there's growing awareness in Europe, and growth has come back into the fore. It's very trendy. You have been promoting growth for a long time, in addition to the Stability Pact, but the financing that you're proposing, national loan or Central European Bank loan. Now, is there not a risk of inflation, which the Germans fear most?
Some economists argue in favour of a return to inflation in order to get rid of the debt burden. I think that inflation is a tax on those who are the most vulnerable and on savers. However, I'm convinced that the borrowing capacity of Europe can be used to a greater extent. In France, we have a high savings ratio, and therefore we should use that resource in order to support the economy.
But would there be anything left for the French savings account?
Now, the national loan was not used as it might have been in order to strengthen our manufacturing industry. At European level, the European Central Bank can intervene. At present, the ECB lends at a low interest rate to the banks, and it has a 1% intervention rate in order to inject liquidity. But what I want is for the ECB to intervene directly with the states, or if it doesn't want to do so, since taboos still persist, to intervene through the European Bailout Fund, which was set up through the treaty, which has been signed, which I've approved, and which will enable this bailout fund to intervene up to 800 billion euros. And if it were backed up by the ECB, then it could intervene to a much greater extent, which would enable Spain to have access to much cheaper funding.
So you won't require that the ECB should be allowed to lend directly to states?
Yes, I will make this part of the negotiation, but my fallback position could be backing up the bailout fund through the European Central Bank.
Yesterday, during the debate with Nicolas Sarkozy, you said that even Mario Draghi and the President of the European Commission, Mr. Barroso, agree with you regarding the need for growth today. But do you really think they're talking about the same growth? Don't you run the risk of being the only person to defend a more socially aware type of sort of growth rather than European leaders who have a very liberal vision of growth?
There are definitely different ways of achieving growth. There's the Keynesian approach. This is my approach. When a continent is in recession, which is the case for Europe, when there's a risk of deflation, then stimulus is necessary. And there's also a competitive approach, and I recognize this. We have to strengthen our manufacturing industry. We have to improve our approach to specific markets. But these approaches have to be combined. You must not be dogmatic about this. We need both supply and demand. If there's no demand, competitive supply cannot find any outlets for its goods, and if there's no competitive supply, even additional demand will not help.
Many Europeans are advocating a single type of contract for all employees. Now, would you commit to maintaining the permanent contract?
Yes. I think, in fact, it should become the established rule rather than the exception for young people, hence my proposal of the generation contract for young people.
As it is, the rule as it is, without modifying it, without making it more flexible?
No, many mechanisms have been introduced. For example, the mutually agreed termination of employment, which enables the employer and the employee to come to an agreement which is not a dismissal, to enable the permanent contract for young people to become the rule. Hence my proposal for the generation contract with the exemption of social charges for...
When you put yourself forward as a candidate for presidency, you designated the world of finance as your enemy. Don't you fear that the world of finance also designates you as its enemy?
I've spoken about the crazy finance, speculative finance.
A plan is in circulation. There are videos. The plan of the world of finance to knock down François Hollande as president.
Oh, so you've met them? It really exists. You'll give me the names, and I'll try to find them myself. But I'm not criticizing finance when it plays its role, when it ensures the funding of states or it enables companies to raise funds for their investments. This financial industry should be encouraged. What I'm criticizing is speculative finance, the financial industry which destroys, upsets the real economy. That's what we have to work on. And the banking reform in France, the struggle against tax havens, the ban on specific purely speculative financial products, and the tax on financial transactions. and I'm sure I'll find allies in Europe regarding this reorientation.
The last few days, Nicolas Sarkozy has been promoting the idea of borders and our nation. Do you think that we should reestablish borders inside the Schengen zone in the event of a sudden influx of immigrants, as we saw during the Arab Revolution?
It's possible here and now. A country under the Schengen rules can decide on a temporary basis to suspend this Schengen agreement.
Would you do it?
If there were a migratory shock due to an international crisis, then I will have to introduce these measures. There are negotiations underway to improve Schengen, and there's no need to threaten to leave the negotiating table in order to have guarantees ensuring that for the border that there are improved controls.
International politics. If you are elected next Sunday, one of your first appointments after meeting Angela Merkel, which will be almost immediate, will be the NATO summit on the 20th and 1st of May in Chicago in the United States, dedicated mainly to the methods of withdrawal of troops present in Afghanistan. And you said that the French forces will have to go home by the end of 2012, except if it is physically impossible. What is your position today regarding this question? Do you still think that you can stick to this timetable?
Yes. The combat troops will have to be withdrawn by the end of the year. We'll keep...
Even if the Afghani army isn't ready to take over?
Well, this has been done during our mission. The Afghan troops will be in charge of Afghan territory, but all combat troops will have to be withdrawn. So what will be left will be some equipment and the personnel involved in this equipment in order to bring the equipment back if this has to be done after 2012. Therefore, I will have to confirm this position at the Chicago summit and instructions to the chiefs of staff for the withdrawal.
Let's talk about Syria now, where the threats of sanctions and intervention, forced interventions, in fact, are not bringing about any results with the Syrian regime. You were favorable for the UN initiative, but then Russia is an ally of Damascus. China is stalling. So now how can you see driving diplomatic actions in these countries?
The positions have already evolved, and I do indeed give credit to the French Foreign Affairs Minister and other nations, in particular the United States. So observers have been sent there, sanctions have been imposed, and we have to step up the pressure on Russia and China. We cannot accept
Meanwhile, many are dying.
that a dictator continues to massacre demonstrators in his own country.
You, as President of the Republic, what could prompt you to intervene militarily abroad in foreign theatres? The rights of man or the greater interests of France?
If I'm President of the Republic, I will only intervene under a UN mandate. And this can be done for military reasons or in order to prevent a conflict and to preserve peace.
Nicolas Sarkozy has stood firm on the Iranian nuclear issue. Now, will you have that same firm stance? And, in fact, what will you say to the Israelis who are exerting pressure on Iran? Now, will you allow the Iranians to obtain the bomb?
No. Nuclear proliferation is unacceptable. The Iranians have the right to have nuclear technology for civilian purposes, but they have to come up with all the guarantees, and they haven't done this so far, that their civilian activities do not have any military implications. And everything that they've withheld to date suggests that they are seeking to acquire a nuclear weapon. Therefore, we have to fight this. We have to continue to do what we've been doing for some years. Sanctions are having some impact, and we have to maintain this pressure and get the Iranian regime to understand that this will not have any consequence on France's policy, that firmness will prevail.
What will you be saying to the leaders of Israel regarding the Iranian issue and the conflict between Israel and the Arabs? In this regard, will there be any differences of approach between you and President Sarkozy if you are elected next Sunday?
I don't claim to be able to go to the Middle East in order to settle the Arab-Israeli conflict. I certainly make no claim to that whatsoever. However, I will use all means available under my mandate to convince the Israelis to go to the negotiating table and to convince the Palestinians to ensure the security of the State of Israel and to ensure that the reconciliation which is underway between Hamas and Fatah to reaffirm, which is not the case at present, to reaffirm the conditions of security for Israel.
Let's look at Mali, the new Afghanistan. Okay, we've seen the issues. What would you do? Now, do you consider that what took place in Libya with Gaddafi's death and the consequences, the direct consequences, the actual domino effect of the situation there, what will you do?
This whole Sahel region has been destabilized, and Al-Qaeda, ACME, has established itself there through specific networks, which are not all fundamentalist networks, but who have a vested interest in destabilizing this part of the world. And there have been incidents in Mauritania, and the disorder arising from the fall of Gaddafi has led to events in Mali, in Niger, and throughout the region. Therefore, we have to combine our efforts. The Western countries have to work together with the United States in order to ensure the security in this region. And at present in Mali, we need to resume the democratic process.
When he was Secretary General of the Élysée, Claude Guéant criticized a number of journalists who used to trend on dangerous ground. What's your point of view regarding the question of, you know that there are a number of hostages, not all journalists, including journalists, notably our colleague of France 24, Romeo Langlois, who is a hostage of the FARC in Colombia. What's your point of view regarding work and danger?
Well, precautions have to be taken, and journalists have to be aware that despite their status, despite their press card, they may be kidnapped or they may be taken hostage. This has happened elsewhere, and let's recall what happened in Iraq or previously in Lebanon. So being a journalist per se does not afford any protection. However, we have to be informed.
So we have to keep going out there.
So we have to ensure that the press can be present everywhere. It's when the press is not around that you should fear the worst. And regarding Romeo Langlois, if we're elected, if we take office, then we have to ensure his release.
But we also know how the Colombian government tends to act, and they tend to be very direct. There's some very dangerous situations there. We saw what happened with Ingrid Betancourt, who was a prisoner for years. Now, will this be a priority for you, along with the other hostages? But will it be on the top of your desk in the Foreign Affairs Ministry as well?
9 hostages, French hostages, are currently being held in different parts of the world. In Colombia, Romeo Langlois, in Somalia, Yemen, and others in the Sahel region. So I don't have the full information on this. I don't know whether I'll be given extra information following the presidential election, but our goal is to ensure their release.
If we can go back to the immediate future for one moment, the real difference, if you're elected, will be in terms of the style of the presidency.
No, the real difference is going to be on social justice and economic policy. But as far as the presidency of the Republic is concerned, the way I address the French people, bringing them together, rising to challenges, yes, there will be a difference in relation to the way the outgoing president has behaved.
Now, if you win, will you go to the Bastille to celebrate?
Well, I haven't planned a venue. I'm cautious. Can you imagine booking somewhere and then not being elected?
Won't you go to a famous Parisian restaurant?
So far, I haven't made a booking in any restaurant.
The problem with champagne is that you can't put the cork back on the bottle.
So you have to be careful with these these foreseen events which never happen, or these events which did take place and which have stuck in people's memory, which must not happen again.
Thank you very much, François Hollande, for being our guest. Thank you, Frédéric Rivière from RFI, and stay with us for more news on France 24 and RFI. Thank you.